I've long since learnt a couple of things about me. I have a speech prepared. It's very unlikely I'll stick to it. And secondly, I like a topic that allows me to speak about whatever I want to speak about. So just because the title is there doesn't necessarily mean I'll follow it piece by piece. But can I say that probably like yourselves, I've attended many lectures, many keynote speeches, and listened to really great speakers. They've been inspirational and really interesting, both near and far. And if I'm honest, I'd prefer to be sitting where you are today. But I am so grateful for this opportunity to speak on the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day and celebrating, of course, the achievements of women. As you can see, the theme of my talk is my reflections on rising to the top, and in particular, in some instances, my reflections on what could be described as a male-orientated profession. But just like the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day, last year we celebrated the 100th anniversary of women in policing. And Winifred was a policewoman who joined Devon and Cornwall Police and was one of their first uniformed and warranted officers. And as you can see there, all women, all parading, they had a very different role to what we do today. There was a police women's department where they dealt with children, drunks and females. And that's really all they did. Because we all know, if you're a woman, you can deal with children really well. I'm a mother, and believe me, I can't. I've been a police officer now for 32 years, coming up in July, and instinctively, you can imagine, I look for clues, links, as to what things mean. Not what they say, not what they are, but what do they really mean? So on seeing the title that I was given of Rising to the Top, clearly my instinct kicked in. Well, what does that mean, rising to the top? What is the top? Am I there then? What does it mean if you're at the top? So what? So what if you're at the top? Is that good? Can it be linked to success? My experience, probably like some of you, of the top is that that only means that it's colder, more exposed, and the only way is down. Unless, of course, when you do get to the top, you spot another peak, and you were never at the top in the first instance, in which case you've been delusional. So being at the top really does require definition. So importantly, I think, I'm going to concentrate on my reflections of being an appointed leader as a Chief Constable of a policing organisation. And for perspective, I'm one of 43 Chief Constables leading Home Office forces, with less than half a dozen of us that are women. And for perspective, Chief Constable leads the operational policing for their areas, and Police and Crime Commissioners are the elected representatives for those same areas, policing regions, but their remit is different to that of a Chief Constable. But to give you some understanding of how many elected PCCs are women, there are 6. To give you some idea then, the shape my talk will take, I want to describe some of the journey through my career, what I think helped define my success within a working context. But I do this on the understanding that I don't define success by work alone. I think it's tangential to this talk, but it always fascinates me as to how people define themselves. I mean, no criticism in that observation at all, but how do you define yourself? Do you do it by your family, the university that you've attended, where you live, by the qualifications that you have, the job, the position you hold, or indeed how much money you earn? Or do you define yourselves by outcomes, what you've accomplished, the changes that you've made, and the difference that you've made? So a little bit about me then. Who am I? What have I learnt? And quite frankly, so what? I left school at 17 after the first year of A-levels, and I disappeared to Hong Kong. not because Hong Kong was the place that I wanted to go. I had relatives in Hong Kong. I wasn't quite that much of a rebel. And for a little while, I was over there doing things that weren't associated with policing in any way, shape or form. And when I came back, I was told by my mother, who I was living with, best you get a job and pay your way. Now, she was a teacher, so you can imagine how she'd taken to me dropping out of the first year at A-levels. So I opened the paper, applied for 2 jobs. One would have led to being a pilot and was an apprenticeship, and the other was to be a police officer. Both potential employers responded, but the police were quicker, and I accepted that first. So 32 years later, 3 forces and various agencies that I've worked for, I've had a great and varied career. But it wasn't always easy. I'm not exceptional, and I would never describe myself as that, but I will work at something if I want it. I did my time on the beat in a place called Luton. I don't know if many know this town, but it has the dubious achievement of once ranking in the top 10 worst towns in England. But what a great place to learn your trade. I truly loved what I did, and I worked hard. And for someone who left school early, I recognised that my level of application was different to anything else that I'd experienced up until that point. I don't actually want this talk to be one of theory, but I think it's worthwhile to weave in some evidence into the story of my rise to be Chief Constable, with some that have been studied when they examined success in many people. Now, this guy is really well known. He does TED Talks all over the place. Richard St. John has done a lot of study, and he's distilled success into 8 main areas. He says that passion, work and focus are very common elements in those who experience success. Passion is also a characteristic on that ladder. It's hard to see on the slide, but on that ladder you can see right at the top the word passion. And this is the new Millennial Leader by the University of Denver, who says that leaders of today, born in the millennium, obviously, have different characteristics to those in the past, and they are described on this particular slide. But you can see passion appears in both studies. Now, I wouldn't describe myself as passionate, but I agree with the analysis. The powerful belief in what you're doing, and that feeling that fits into most of the jobs that I've had. I don't describe policing as a job. To me, it's much more than that. And I think to be successful, I believe you have to have passion about what you're doing, which then leads on to hard work and to focus. So back to my time then in Luton and learning my trade. What I would add to the lessons I've learnt in leadership and to be successful is that there is a skill in knowing when an opportunity arises. At that time, my opportunity was in the guise of a statement of fact. And that statement was, you're female, we need you on the vice squad. That was it. Nothing about my skill, just about my sex. I grabbed the offer and made something of it. Understanding opportunities is not a core competence we talk about in success that often, but I think it's a valuable lesson to learn in life and in leadership, spotting them and acting on them in the right measure. It perhaps is about flexibility and adaptability, and you'll see flexibility is on that ladder. So for me, spotting opportunities was really important. Whilst I was on the Vice Squad, which was a unit that had been set up for the first time in an area that really had a problem with vice-related crime, I had to work through internal doubts that I had. Can I do it? Am I good enough? Do I know enough? I'm really young in service, should I be here? Doubting at every opportunity. But I stuck at it and made sure that the higher levels of visibility that a vice squad gave me, I used to my advantage. And I worked my way into investigating and eventually into the Criminal Investigation Department, or the CID, rising through each rank within CID and eventually becoming the first female to lead that area of policing within Bedfordshire. So far, I agree that on looking back, passion or belief in what you're doing, hard work and pushing yourself have a place in my success, but don't underestimate the value of opportunity. Viola Davis then. Viola Davis said, "The only thing that separates women of colour from anything else is opportunity." And she was speaking a few months ago about winning an Emmy for her role in a drama. It took 67 years for a black woman to get the Best Actress award. And she continued, "You can't get an Emmy if there are no roles written for a black woman." A stark message for the industry, and of course for different reasons, the recent Oscars saw something similar playing out in relation to lack of opportunity. And of course, the industry continues to suffer from those that boycotted at the ceremony. So if I can leave something hanging, which I will go back to, I see part of my role now as a leader of an organisation is to provide opportunities. But how do we know when to take an opportunity and when to let one go? I talk about three things that, in my view, go hand in hand with that question. You do need to know yourself, know your business, and know the people that you work with, for, or to. They seem simple, don't they? But really, knowing yourself is one that takes a lifetime. How you work, how you react, what are your preferences? How do you learn? How do you get things done, knowing yourself? It needs honesty, it needs exploration, and it takes insight. So knowing yourself, adapting to changes with any business requires application. And therefore, knowing your business, being damn good at it, if you like, isn't easy. It's a continual process. When you get better at knowing yourself and knowing your business, then I firmly believe opportunities appear more frequently. When you are a leader and have responsibility for a team, it's important to know as much as you can about them in order to provide the opportunities and to be able to provide connections that people need in order to move through their career. So just as a way of segue, a little break, if you like, intermission break. I've already said that my preferred field was CID, and within that I became very interested in the role of hostage negotiators that you heard the Professor talk about, and the role that could play that I could play in that, bringing about conclusions to volatile incidents. And you heard that I eventually led a team of negotiators in Bedfordshire. And of course, I'm really proud and really grateful I was able to save people's lives through talking. I need to share with you one of the qualities of a negotiator. A negotiator can talk, and it really helps if they're quite boring when they talk. It's not a quality I mention on a CV, to be able to talk and to be boring whilst you talk. But you're about 10 minutes into the receiving end of that quality. Now, if you want to find out, well, could you be a negotiator? Find the odd 4 or 5-year-old. And if you can win in a conversation with a 4 or 5-year-old without giving in to what they actually want, then you too can be a negotiator, because it was the best practice I ever had when I had children to try and negotiate with a 4 and a 5-year-old. No demand will ever be too weird, and it will never be delivered with such passion as a child can give you. So I highlight my role as a negotiator in order to talk about some qualities that I think I learnt from being in that role as a negotiator that without doubt has helped me within my leadership. But it wouldn't do to talk to you without giving a little bit of a war story. And I was involved in a particular siege in Hackney in London that went on for some days. And I was one of the negotiators that was brought in to try and talk to the individual and try and get him to come out of the house. Now, he was up most of the night. We'd evacuated most of the residents of this particular area, and the only way we could talk to him was through a loudspeaker. So there we are in the dead of night in Hackney, talking to him through a loudspeaker. When you work as a negotiator, and I'll come on to this, you don't work alone, you work in a team, and you listen to the advice of your team if you're the main person talking. And on this particular occasion, an instruction was fed back to me that as a result of other techniques, they thought that the man was listening to me. And the instruction I was given was an unusual one in my career, but the request was, Debbie, is there any chance you can sound sexier? No, I replied, not through a megaphone. Be aware that sometimes you're asked to do things that you can't quite see where it fits in the picture at the point in time. So, what is it about a negotiator that I think is really important in terms of leadership? I think from my role as a negotiator, I learnt that active attention, active listening is really important. You don't lie as a negotiator, you don't promise things you can't deliver, and you bring in doubt and you talk about what is achievable. They don't work alone, as I've said, and they work in collaboration with others. Of all the roles I've undertaken as a police officer, that one perhaps, as I said, helped me hone my skills in terms of leading a larger organisation. So for those that were listening, you remember I joined the police service having left school at 17, first year of A-levels. And somewhere in my career, I managed to get some A-levels, and then I was really lucky enough to be able to go to Cambridge University, and I went to Wolfson College in Cambridge, which seems fitting to mention today, as it's the first Cambridge college that admitted men and women on an equal basis. I always say learning and achievement comes in various forms and at different times for different people. But the one thing I would absolutely say is essential to success is an ability to be an independent learner. Without doubt for me, it's a skill that isn't given the credit it should, but it tends to be the cause of issues in organisations whose employees crave to be told what to do. We need to be able to find out ourselves. We need to dare to learn or dare to know. There's no shame in finding out for yourself. In the last 8 years, I've been part of an executive team, which also you heard about, delivering policing either in Devon and Cornwall, and since 2012 as the Chief Constable of Dorset. Of course, now both forces are working in collaboration, which many commentators say is the direction for many organisations in the years ahead. The skills to lead alongside others are, in my opinion, akin to those used in negotiating. So to be successful, my background in negotiating seems to have been beneficial to me in later life. So to get into executive leadership within policing, we undergo National Assessment Centre processes. They take the form of several exercises, replicating tasks executives or chief officers within policing have to undertake. The assessment centre that I did lasted 3 days and consisted of psychometric tests, I'm sure you've done them, and then 6 or 7 police-related exercises. Do you remember I spoke about knowing yourself? Well, I knew myself well enough to know that this process would not suit my way of working. But I wanted to be a chief officer, so I took the view, I'll get through this. It might not be the first time, but I will get through this. Once through, you then have to attend and pass a senior command course, which in my case lasted several months, and then apply for jobs and go through whatever selection process that particular job wants to run. So the assessment centre is the first of many hurdles. It was daunting, and I've got to say colleagues sometimes built it up to be more daunting than it actually was. Interesting, between the views of females and males. Females will not put themselves forward for that type of process until they are absolutely sure they can get through. Remember though, I said, I knew myself and I just thought, I think I'm good enough, but I'll probably need a few attempts at this. I say it without criticism, but men don't tend to work like that, in my opinion. They'll have a go. I've got 70% of the skills, I'm just going to have a go, because I might get lucky. Women don't act like that, in my opinion, in my organisation. They want 100% sure, to be sure that they are going to get through. And so I say, actually, embrace the masculine view that if you've got 70% of the skills, have a go if you really want the job at the end of the day. So I had a go. What do you think happened? I know myself, go on, you won't be wrong. I didn't get through. You will remember I spoke about Richard St. John. He talks about persisting over failure, and forgive me, but it just happens to be an acronym that means something. Criticism, rejection, assholes, and pressure. It's his slide, not mine, thanks to Google. You need to persist, even through failure. And it took me not one attempt, not 2 attempts, but 3 attempts. It was exhausting. It was somewhat depressing, because you think you're not good enough. But I wanted to be a chief officer, and I was going to get through. So I did, and I eventually got through the other end. What I want to say to people is that I lead is don't think that we haven't had to feature in the failure category in some parts. It's sometimes easy to see us and think they must be great, superhuman, walk on water, because they've got where they've got. A lot of failure is behind us, and there's nothing to be ashamed about in relation to that. My role now has expanded. As well as being a Chief of Dorset, I've taken on national roles on behalf of national policing, and that's called the National Police Chiefs Council. I lead for forensic science for British policing, which is a large portfolio, as you can imagine, ranging from biometrics to pathology and also disaster victim identification. And I thought I'd just talk a little bit about these areas of policing, because I think they bring out something that I think helps shape and define leaders. So within DVI, it's not an easy subject to talk about, as it comes with trauma. Think about the Asian tsunami or MH17, which was the aircraft that came down in the Ukraine, both of which we, British policing, were heavily involved in. You perhaps don't know that, but if there are any British subjects believed to be on a plane or in an area that's subject to disaster, British policing will be deployed to it in most instances. Can you imagine being a family that's lost someone and needs to be assured that the state, policing, the government, does all it can to identify those that have died, and if possible, return them to families where we can? So why do this type of work? Well, I'll tell you why, because I think it's so important, whilst dealing with disaster, that we are honest with families about what we can and can't do, and doing all we can to help them through the trauma. Dealing with the victims with dignity and ensuring their loved ones have the information they need. If ever I was to describe myself as passionate, it would be about this area of policing, to provide the best possible service for those who are suffering. And on this point, the word service resonates to me and is central to what I do. All I've accomplished in rank and position is nothing if it doesn't come with good service, especially in critical areas of policing. Forensic science is also an area that requires me to think differently and be immersed in a world I don't and will never fully understand. I'm not a scientist. But I do understand the context, and I can see where we can do things differently. And in that area, I ask lots of questions, and I have a curiosity about what could be. And there is something about that that helps me deliver the service that I do. I'm not afraid to ask questions, and I'm not afraid to say, I don't have the answer, come on, help. Alongside these two themed areas of work, I also coordinate and a co-director for supporting the assessment of future leaders of the service. Direct entry, so not having had to join as a constable, with permeable movement in and out of the service is something that we're looking at. And it'll probably come alongside a much flatter structure, so not as many rank structures. And in my view, new and emerging leaders require support, but also have a fundamental role, I have a fundamental role, in providing those with opportunities, if you remember. Throughout my time within policing, my version of leadership is founded on an intimacy with the relationship of leadership. And Anita Roddick, who led the Body Shop, spoke about that really powerfully. Authenticity is really important to me. I want and probably need to connect those that I lead and those that I mentor. So I share things with them, and as I lead now, I see that part of my role is to bring, show, and move on. Give someone else the ultimate opportunity to have my job. Role models are really important, and if I can give anyone confidence to think, well, she did it, then so much the better. And for the 6 or 7 people that I mentor, it's that, if that's all I give them, then I've done something. The future is more about others than it is about me. So I listen, I show, and I will move out of the way. That's hard, you know, because I've invested the most of my adult life in this business that we call policing. But it goes back to my point. How do you define success? I would prefer to concentrate on outcomes and the future journey. The titles, rank, medals are great, and I'm very grateful for them, but it's more than that to me. It's about the outcomes. So what is the future then of policing, but more importantly, Dorset? The country, region and county are changing. I'm keeping away from the EU debate. I was listening to the radio, everybody's getting into hot water in relation to that, aren't they? And regardless of outcome, things will change. Communities are changing. The way we are governed is changing. The state is shrinking and devolution taking its places in many areas. Since 2010, Dorset Police's budget has reduced by over 20%. And whilst we were told in December that policing budgets have been protected, it comes with various caveats, as you can imagine. What was not protected were our partners' budgets, the people we work alongside, and they have to make now some really difficult decisions. And understandably, that might affect us. And it could impact onto policing, as sometimes we are seen as the service of last resort. This at the same time as a digital revolution, the speed of which, quite frankly, is jaw-dropping, creates new opportunities and new threats. One offender can reach multiple victims. Investigating new types of crime is more costly and complex than investigating the more traditional. It requires staff to be trained and equipped in totally different ways. Moving away then from traditional theft from motor vehicles, theft of property, burglary, into things like child sex exploitation and abuse, into forced marriages, FGM, domestic violence and abuse, coercive behaviour, new law that is has come in. All of that takes much more time, effort, is much more complex. And if a computer or digital type device is involved, it requires us to have different skills. The complexity of criminal networks requires us to be more sophisticated in our approach. And we believe we can do that in partnership with others, either across force boundaries with Devon and Cornwall or within the region. But what does demand in Dorset look like? Hard slide to see, there's lots of information on there, but this is one day in policing in Dorset. And I rarely do a talk without talking about this. So, generally, we will make 35 arrests, we'll record 99 crimes a day, just under 500 incidents are reported to us, 219 of those will be through the 999 system, and just over 1,000 in terms of non-emergency calls to us each day. We will attend and record 81 antisocial behaviour incidents, 12 road traffic collisions, and our officers will be dealing with roughly 2 reports of missing people a day. And we'll undertake at least one place of safety order or mental health section, be involved in either the sectioning and or be a partner, alongside a partner that is doing something the same. You can see in the centre there, we manage 851 sexual offenders under multi-agency public protection, and we support 722 children and young people subject to child protection plans alongside our partners. 20% roughly of that infographic involves crime. The rest is about managing the risk, managing the threat, or actually finding somebody that was lost, got no crime attached to it at all. That's what Dorset Police do in a day. And if you don't come from Dorset and you want to know what goes on in your area where you live, infographics like that are available for each and every policing district. So you remember I was talking though, that's local demand, but understandably criminals don't just stay in Dorset, they travel. So we need to be able to deal with that approach. So alongside our strategic alliance partners, we have to ensure that we have resilience for the new types of crime, and we can still provide value for money and stay within our budget. So currently both forces, Devon and Cornwall and Dorset, are looking at 27 business areas on which to collaborate, and 7 of those are already in implementation. So firearms, admin services, fleet management, just to name a few, are all now run across 2 police force areas. And as I said in my talk, working in collaboration, influencing and negotiating what needs to be done alongside other leaders is much more prevalent in today's policing landscape than it was 3 or 4 years ago. So as an aside, Harvard Business School stated that there are 3 recognised gaps in global leadership. They are empathy, collaboration, and thinking agility. Exactly the space we need to fill. And as a generalisation, and this comes with a huge generalisation warning, these skills are the skills that women excel in. Empathy, thinking agility, and working with others in collaboration. So changes in working across boundaries are high on our agenda. But what about the local then? Well, we need to be closely aligned, and I would like to see the current work with partners to be even more joined up. To develop further approaches to prevention and intervention, especially in relation to public protection and protecting those that are most vulnerable. More focused neighbourhood policing, using resources in the most efficient and effective way. So therefore, I am an advocate of the best use of technology. And soon you will see, not as soon as the Police and Crime Commissioner would want, but soon you will see body-worn videos on officers in Dorset as a matter of course. That was a pledge made by the PCC with my absolute commitment to be able to deliver it. We will have mobile devices, tablets and phones on which officers are working, decreasing the amount of time they have to return to buildings to complete paperwork. And best use of resources means this. If you see someone in Bournemouth dealing with a firearms incident and they have a Devon and Cornwall badge on their shirt, you shouldn't be concerned by that. You should be concerned about the service that they deliver. And alongside this, I go back to a quote that was made back in the 1800s by Sir Robert Peel who was Home Secretary in 1822. And he established the first full-time centrally organised police force in England and Wales. And he said, amongst many other functions, the police secured public favour by a ready offering of individual service and friendship to all members of society, without regard to their race or social standing. This is an old picture, and it's called The Foundling, and it shows the courage and compassion of a police officer finding an abandoned child. This isn't about being soft and fluffy. This is about living in a society which is a little bit kinder, where when nobody else will or can help, we don't turn our back. By the way, that doesn't mean you should ring us when you get delivered the wrong pizza, or there's a deer in your garden, or your washing machine has broken down, all of which we have over our telephone systems. Seriously though, I want to live in a society that does not, should I say, step over the person in the gutter and not look back at them. It's not why I joined. It's not my idea of service, and it lacks compassion and caring, a final quality that I think defines success. And just doing what I'm paid to do is not how I want to be judged. Finally then, today of all days, judge me on the characteristics I think are important as a leader. Male or female. But know this, and I think this is pertinent for International Women's Day. Marian Albright, who was US Secretary of State, said, "There is a special place in hell for women who won't help other women." Believe me, I'll get there regardless of that issue. But also, I would add to her quote, I think there is a special place in hell for women that don't help other women, but there's also a place for those who step over others people, who need a little bit of help right now. Whatever path you take, my success, I would want to be defined as daring to care. Thank you.